I'm glad and very proud about this significant collaboration between British Council and PinchukArtCentre about Anisha Kапura, who we know is truly a leading artist of our time. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you, first of all, Sir Nорманом Розенталем. Ich habe das Vergnügen, dich vorzustellen.
Vielen Dank, vielen Dank.
Ja, ich habe das Vergnügen, dich vorzustellen.
Spasiba.
Of whom we know that he is a leading figure and leading character and famous character in contemporary art. I want to say later something more about your biography just shortly, but first of all I want to ask you, Martin, to make a short introduction about our collaboration.
Thank you, Eckhart, and may I echo what you say about the importance of collaboration between the British Council and the PinchukArtCentre, and I hope that this is something that will go on for a long time. When the Anisha Kapura exhibition was being put together, we both thought it would be an excellent idea to have a series of talks which could help illustrate the work of the artist by people who know him and who've worked with him. And in the series this month, we have obviously Nорманом Розенталем, who I'm absolutely delighted to see here in Kiev. And in 2 days' time, on Saturday at 4 p.m. in this same hall, we will have Matthew Springford, who was the producer of a BBC omnibus documentary about Anisha Kapura. And thirdly, in the following Saturday, on the 29th, we will have Caroline Douglas, who is the head of the Arts Council of England's art collection. So I just ask you to put those in your diaries, and I hope you can come and listen to those talks as well. It's a really great privilege for us to be able to have Sir Nорманом Розенталем with us for this talk, as someone who I think has curating and art in his blood. And he told me that the first exhibition that he ever curated was when he was still a student, aged about 20, at Leicester University, which was an exhibition of Cornish, of artists based in Cornwall, such as Barbara Hepworth and Peter Lanyon. Probably rather surprising the university authorities
Досить дивно було, що університет з ентузіазмом таку виставку організував.
Ever since, with 31 years at the Royal Academy as exhibition secretary, where he revolutionized the type of exhibitions that were seen in the Piccadilly. I won't steal Eckhart's thunder, because I know he's going to say more about Norman's biography, but to say that the event will take the format of a conversation between Ekkhard Schneider and Nорманом Розенталем, and I hope you enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, indeed. I mean, Nормаnon is really a legend, and I would need almost the whole evening to tell more about the biography in total. So I want to make a very short excerpt about this. Indeed, he started with 21 years to make his first exhibition, which is astonishing.
64.
Yes, 64. It was
1965.
It was
65.
65. So
Yeah.
21. You were 21. And I mean, over the years, he was programming the Royal Academy for 31 years, and he made really, say, legendary exhibitions. For example, A New Spirit in Painting, 1981. He curated 74, the first appearance of leading German artists in London, with Baselitz, Kiefer, Beuys, Polke, Pank, and Richter, which was very important, of course, especially for contemporary art in Great Britain, as it gave a certain input, which at that time, I think the audience in Great Britain really had necessary to understand. And his deep interest of painting brought him to create shows about Mantegna, Poussin, Goya, just to mention some of these important exhibitions he made. A sensation was his show, Sensation. I must say I've seen it, it was really amazing, especially as there were really a lot of artists we both like and we both share our interest in, like Damien Hirst, like Jeff Koons and Catalan and others. And he was responsible for the groundbreaking shows at Martin Gropius Bau in a leading institution in Berlin, with Zeitgeist 1982 and Metropolis 1991. And to mention this, of course, and this combines us, and that's the reason why we are sitting here, he made a really fantastic show at the Royal Academy about Anisha Kapur. It was 2009?
Yeah, it was the last show in my time, as it were.
Okay.
But actually, they've been doing shows that were on my program ever since. So.
But what I learned from you yesterday was, and this is fantastic to hear about. Can I tell about the project in Martin Gropius Bau for next year?
Yes, yes.
The Anisha Kapur, he is working on a really significant overview at this big institution in Martin Gropius Bau in Berlin, of Anisha Kapur for next year. So we both know Anisha Kapur for a certain while.
Yeah, I had Anisha Kapur. Actually, I had a rather kind of complex relationship with Anish. Aesthetic relationship. Obviously, yeah. I've known Anish as a person and as an artist almost since he kind of broke into the London scene. If you were part of the London art world,
yes,
somehow you couldn't but know Anish Kapoor. I mean, he was one of the leading artists, obviously, of one of the, at that time, only two significant avant-garde galleries in London.
Yes.
The Lisson Gallery, of course, and then there was Nigel Greenwood. I'm talking about back in the 70s and very early 80s, when the art world of London and the art world in general was a very small place.
It was, indeed.
If you were part of it, and I wasn't an artist, but somehow I was a little bit engaged, I mean, everybody knew everybody, and so I knew Anish,
yes,
of course.
Yeah.
And I knew his work, and I saw his work, I mean, his early work, I mean, like, what's it called, 1,000
years.
1,000 years,
yes,
which is a kind of piece, a relatively small piece, you know, when Anish was, you know, when...
Which we have, by the way, in our exhibition.
You have
two beautiful works.
You have two beautiful works of 1,000 years, but it's a small work of art. I mean, what you might call the monumental Anish had not broken into the world at that point.
Yes.
And then he went through a phase which I found, for me, a bit problematic. Because I suppose, when I say problematic, it's because I suppose naturally I have a kind of expression, my interest in art is fundamentally kind of grounded. When I say in expressionism, I don't mean necessarily Kirchner or Baselitz, but a kind of expressiveness. You know, for me, Picasso is an expressionist artist, not even in the late work, but right through his career.
But quite refined.
Very refined,
yes,
but, you know, with a kind of incredible eroticism in his work,
yes,
which at that point I did not perceive very much in Anish. And in fact, when he started making his mirrors, and those became the ubiquitous things, I began to think they're getting rather, that he was becoming
too polished?
Rather...
Too polished? Do you think too polished?
Not even too polished, but too, I mean, almost like applied art. I felt they were too decorative. Decorative, you know, I'm not into decorative art as such. And then I had an incredible revelation relatively recently. In fact, I was in Munich at the time when I was curating the big retrospective of Georg Baselitz, who is a kind of a painter who was a bit of a leitmotif in my life for all sorts of reasons.
Yes, yes.
And he's one of the artists I most support, you know, because if you're a curator, You have artists that you
love,
and you will do in a way.
You're working for it, but not that you love them. Huh?
What? And the others? Yeah. And I went I was in Munich, because at that point Baselitz was living in Munich already, and he has his office in Munich, and I was doing some research on his work to prepare the exhibition. And at that time, it was the day before the opening, I think, Anisha Kapur had an exhibition in this terrifying building, the Haus der Kunst in Munich. Actually, it's the only job I was ever offered, was to be director of the Haus der Kunst. But I have to say, the idea of me kind of leading...
Chris Durkin was there.
Long before, this time Chris Durkin was there, but long before I was offered the directorship by the minister rang me up early one morning and said, would you like to be director of the Haus der Kunst? And the very idea of being director of this museum, which was basically Hitler's, Adolf Hitler's museum of modern art.
And where they had the show Entartete Kunst.
Where they had, no, they didn't. Entartete Kunst was not there. Where they had the big, Entartete Kunst was not in the Haus der Kunst. Entartete Kunst was somewhere else in Munich. The big state exhibitions were in Haus der Kunst. The big ghastly fascist art exhibitions were in Haus der Kunst. And in many ways, it's a very remarkable building, and very big and very spacious, but it has nuances which to me were absolutely terrifying and unacceptable, and I said there's no way that I could be director of this place. But nonetheless, I went to see Anisha's exhibition inevitably, and it was a little bit like Saul and Paul. I really kind of fell down, and there we had this extraordinary work, this train, and I think in a minute we're going to stop, and we should see, and you will see this, the famous train made of red Vaseline or red wax, going through this monumental train, going through these huge galleries, very, very slowly and bloodily through this Haus der Kunst. And I thought, what fantastic, sweet revenge by Anisha Kapur, who, curiously enough, people may not realize this, in fact, is Jewish.
Yes.
He was born in India of a Jewish mother.
Exactly.
And it's very strange. Exactly. But anyway, he looks so Indian, is very Indian, very connected to Indian, but he comes from a Jewish Indian family.
And he even lived for a certain period in Israel.
So let's look at the films.
Yes.
Shall we look at the films and turn round and then maybe make a few little comments? Because I presume everybody has seen the exhibition, but maybe a few people haven't. And anyway, it's good to be reminded of pieces. So let's have a quick look, and you'll see photographs basically of the exhibition at the Royal Academy 4 years ago, some photographs and films of the exhibition here, and one or two big outdoor sculptures, the one in Chicago and the one he completed recently in connection with the Olympic Games.
Royal Academy,
Just not fully formed.
I think the whole so we'll hear him
notion of being, being an artist today is that it is a kind of discovery, and that one takes on different but related sets of ideas. One of them here, of course, is colour. There's much colour in the show, and I've always worked with colour in different ways. I'm interested in it because the way I've come to it is to think of colour as being stuff. It's not just surface, in other words. It's stuff, and it's that sort of interplay between the physicalness of it and a sense that actually it's rather illusory, it's rather elusive. We're watching this big
pure colour is a big issue in Anisha.
Yes.
It's a bit
here
like
we see the train.
A monochromatic painting, sort of slowly making its journey through the gallery. Again, with this work here, I've given it a Sanskrit title, which is the word swayam. Swayam meaning auto-generated, self-made. It's a kind of fiction at one level.
Should this be loud?
That the passage
Can we have it louder?
These galleries of this big
a little bit louder.
It's bigger than the doors. As it moves through,
no,
it sort of sculpts itself. It oozes and pushes itself through the galleries, giving it the form that is the doorways. the implications of that are that it's making itself, it's doing its own thing. That I'm not involved. Of course I am involved, but I chose the red. I made the process, but then I try and leave it alone. The process reveals all that's needed to be revealed. In a way, I feel I'm not trying to say something, but to let it occur. And that's true of most of the works in the show. Because, there's no, I mean, I make work for myself, and to try and pursue an idea. Perhaps when one's got a lot to say, there's less room for the viewer. And what I'm concerned to do is to try and say, no, actually, I've got nothing to say. Nothing much to say anyway, or as little to say as possible, and let the viewer find that space in themselves. And maybe that's a process that's has something to do with engagement. I don't believe in trying the idea that one, as I'm saying, I don't feel I have a message to give, a thing to say. So therefore, I'm not trying to illustrate a point. One makes the work one makes, and it's very.
It's always a theme, huh?
What happens to it, has to. If it's any good, it'll find a life for itself. It has to stand up for itself. I can't defend it endlessly.
That, I think, is presumably the film of the exhibition at the Royal Academy.
Why is the tone not louder? Not our tone, but the tone of the film. Mm-hmm.
So here we have the great cloud sculpture in Chicago. And one has to say that, a sculpture like that changes a city in every sense. It's unbelievably popular. It's next to the Art Institute in Chicago. It's situated. And just to be there is just fantastically exciting, entertaining, gives pleasure to absolutely everybody who sees it. It gives pleasure to children, and it gives pleasure to kind of art addicts kind of highfalutin art addicts like myself, highbrow art addicts like myself. And that is what is so wonderful about Anísh, I think. One of the things we should discuss later on that some people might want to criticize him for is that his art has something very appealing to absolutely everybody in it. And some people resent that. They want art to be just for a small elite. And I think art also should make sense to everybody. And this piece certainly does. And it changes the horizon of a city.
And it makes everyone more beautiful.
Yeah. So this is the great public sculpture, and a great sculpture like that in Kiev would be fantastic.
Yeah, this was in New York.
This was at the Rockefeller Center.
Yeah.
Equally fantastic, the way it reflected the sky as well.
20 meter diameter.
It was fantastic to see it. And this is the piece now that he's just had built at the Olympic Games, the piece which is called, what is it called? I did write it down. It's called Orbit, naturally. And it's trying somehow to be a kind of somewhere between Tatlin and the Eiffel Tower.
Exactly, Tatlin and Eiffel Tower, yeah.
And people forget that Tatlin's tower was supposed to reach right up into the sky. It was supposed to be twice as high as the Eiffel Tower. Of course, it was never built. But if it had been built, it would have been one of the great wonders of the world, in my opinion. And there is actually a fantastic kind of virtual film that was made by a Japanese studio, which we showed once at the Royal Academy when we had a wonderful exhibition of Russian art. And it was fantastic to see it, because you really understood what Tatlin's Tower was. It was supposed to broadcast the beautiful message of communism right through the world. And it was supposed to be a great radio tower.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It was a great, and here we see in the exhibition here, many of these wonderful projects, many of them unrealized, that Anish has in his head. And if you get down and look at them and try and imagine yourself as a very tiny person, you will see, again, his extraordinary attitude to space. He's, of course, an architect, too. A kind of natural architect, a kind of sculptural architect.
Yes.
Of a very unique kind. And there he's making a kind of incredible, I mean, for want of a better word, a great clitoris in the landscape.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's a great, incredibly sexual kind of cut into the landscape.
Which is anyhow an important
at the same time,
idea of his work, this sexual contact.
Yeah. And here we have a very masculine object.
Shooting.
Shooting. A deeply masculine. This photograph making the object, which we also had at the
shooting with color. I mean, shooting with paint.
Of course, yeah. And of course,
like action painting.
I think the other I mean, there are many important things to say about Anish. The wonderful thing about Anish, and as he calls the train self-generated, in a way, there's something about Anish's work where everything is as though it is self-generated. Of course, every artist has a style. Let me turn around and face you now, maybe. Otherwise, it's getting rather rude if I keep turning my back to you. But every artist has a style, and every work of Anish is quite definitely by Anisha Kapura. But at the same time, he's found an extraordinary strategy, which I think is almost unique, which you can't even say about the American minimalists like Richard Serra or even Carl Andre. That somehow the work appears literally to be without the hand of the artist.
Yeah, that's true.
In a very special way, in a very particular and a very intense way. And I think that is one of the extraordinary things about Kapur. It's as though the pieces have always existed.
As if made
For example,
by God.
when he made his those first concrete pieces, which we first showed at the Royal Academy, in fact, and you have a second wonderful piece, which is like this incredible avenue, this wonderful avenue of pieces, which I think is called...
between shit and architecture.
Between shit and architecture. But in some ways, one almost could imagine it green, like being incredible hedges, you know, like a series of these extraordinary hedges in a beautiful garden. And it's as though they've always been there, as though they're not made by anybody in particular. And in fact, there's something eternal and perfect, and one doesn't really know whether they are of this time or whether they're 5,000 or 10,000 years old. There's something about Anish I can't really quite explain. In fact, I can explain, because I've tried to explain now, as though his art was forever. And that I find particularly beautiful, effective, and he's found a very special route, which is, I think, unique. What do you think about that?
No, I absolutely agree. I always admired the way how he's using material and transforming it in a very natural way, that it is not, say, as if it's transformed by an artist, but it's just done as if God has done it.
Yeah. Like the great, beautiful alabaster piece in the exhibition.
For example.
He has an incredible respect for material, for stone. For example, one I've recently, he has a whole separate studio of fantastic, which he's never exhibited before, of marble pieces. Literally dozens and dozens of marble pieces. He said to me, Norman, can you find me a way in which we can perhaps exhibit them? And, you know, I'm working on that in a certain kind of way, to show Anish working with incredible respect for material in a way that none of the great American minimalists, you know, he's obviously related to minimalism at one level, but also there's a kind of Boycean aspect to his work as well. Wouldn't you agree with that, Eckhard?
It is indeed. As whenever I talk with him, he said how interested he is in the position of Beuys, especially, I think, about, say, both sides of what an art means. Say the shiny side of the work and the dark side of the work. especially the dark side. He's always interested to explore it in different direction, in both sides of the direction.
Yeah, and as I say, it's the respect, and it has a lot to do with his respect for material. It's as though anything would do. He could make sculpture like Beuys. He could make sculpture out of anything, out of nothing, out of a huge pile of rubbish, I suppose. Yeah. He could easily make sculpture if he wanted to. At the same time, he employs these extraordinary people. Of course, he doesn't make a lot of it himself. I mean, he has a huge, complex studio practice, and
which is a normal practice nowadays of all our leading artists,
and has always been, of course.
Yes, of course, it was.
True. It's a long tradition of the artist studio. So he has all sorts of kids working in his studio. Many of them artists themselves. Artists employing other artists, as it were, young artists. Jeff Koons has the same. Many artists have this, and of course, he doesn't actually manufacture the things, but he is unbelievably attentive to the detail. And at the same time, for example, now he's making an astonishing series of paintings. Again, I was never very keen. Anish does do paintings, and but he has now recently done the most astonishing series of very expressive red paintings that contain within them incredible anguish. And, the anguish is very understandable at the moment in his life.
And what is astonishing about these works are that they are pure materialization of color. It is not that it paints on a surface. It is more that the material itself expresses that it is color. And I mean, I must say, I think still there is his work to discover as a painter. I don't know whether you've seen. You should make an exhibition with him about this.
I hope to.
I would love to do it, I must say.
I mean, his latest paintings are very extraordinary, yet he is incredibly insecure about them for some reason, and has hardly shown them to anybody. But I can tell you they are absolutely fantastic. But can we say something about color? Do you think color has a kind of symbolic meaning for him, in the way it did for artists like Yves Klein, or is it just what it is? Does it have a metaphysical aspect?
I think it has a certain metaphysical and material aspect, both sides. Oh, yeah, okay. And, I mean, how he uses color, I mean, if you look again at this shooting into the corner, it is like action painting, using the material as real, strong, physical material, and not only as a sublime surface. And he's using it that it has a deep, say, metaphoric character about the symbolic meaning of like blood, to use it like blood. In a deep sense, and combining it then, I mean, with the other works which are deep connected to the question of darkness and going into the earth, then I think we find a certain balance between both sides he is exploring, which I think the most interesting thing of Anisha Kapoor is that he's always going not only in one direction, but in different directions.
Simultaneously.
Exactly, and exploring at the same time, for example, the raw side and the sublime side at the same time.
I mean, for example, the train in Munich in the Haus der Kunst. And of course it had been shown previously in France, in a museum in France, where I'm sure it had a completely different nuanced meaning.
Of course,
but in Germany, it obviously had the meaning of those incredible trains that were taking human beings of all kinds to their terrible deaths in camps across Europe, from Italy, from Germany, from France, from wherever, and transporting them in the most terrible, in kind of bloody trains. And to see this bloody train in the Haus der Kunst was a kind of very appropriate and meaningful.
I can imagine, yeah. Mm.
And yet, the Royal Academy, it had a different meaning. If I can read you a little, do you mind if I read you a little paragraph of my own essay?
Please, yes, do this.
If I may, which I wrote an essay about that piece. And I'm going to read you a little piece, if I may, if I can find it, yeah, somewhere here. Try and read it slowly so the... In the context of the Royal Academy, Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Masque of the Red Death, of 1841, seemed specially pertinent. In Poe's terrifying account, that's to say in The Masque of the Red Death, Prince Prospero blindly imagines that he can protect himself and his friends from the Red Death that is sweeping his territories. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal. The redness and the horror of the blood, those are the words of Edgar Allan Poe. Poe's description of the castellated abbey, inside which Prince Prospero, who was a very rich man, had sealed himself with his friends, has certain curious affinities with the architecture of Burlington House. I quote Poe again. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. The wall had gates of iron, which the Royal Academy has, incidentally. Poe goes on to describe a series of 7 grand rooms, each suffused with intense but different colors. The final one black with panes of scarlet, a deep blood color, in which stood a gigantic clock of ebony, which of course reminds me of that beautiful painting. Do you know that painting of Cézanne, The Black Clock?
Yes.
Of course, not one of Prince Prospero's chosen elite dancing through these red rooms was ultimately able to evade the spectre of the Red Death, as it inevitably penetrated their grand masked ball.
Great.
Don't you think that's rather wonderful?
That's wonderful.
And so somehow I think, you know, through this piece, you know, I mean, these things, I mean, works of art bring associations. And these associations are very beautiful. And I think everybody, one of the great things about Anisha Kapur to me is that anyone, you know, for example, you look at yourself in the mirror, and you're turned upside down, for example, you will see yourself distorted. And he plays these beautiful tricks. Or recently he had one of these mirrors in a landscape in England on what we call the South Downs, which is in the Brighton Festival. Behind Brighton in England, there's a wonderful kind of range of hills called the South Downs, a range of chalk hills. And on these chalked hills, he put this great, wonderful mirror. And you looked in this mirror and you suddenly saw the sheep, you know, that were behind you in a field. It was in a field. And it was like looking at a painting by Constable. It was like looking at a beautiful painting. Now, of course, that's a relatively sophisticated kind of reaction to it. But on the other hand, for anybody who sees this thing could not fail to be entertained. And the idea that somehow entertainment is bad in art, of course, which a lot of critics and a lot of people who are involved in art who feel that art has got to be hard, difficult, philosophical, sociological, etc., and kind of solve all the problems of the world. If you go to documenters and biennales around the world, every artist seems to be trying to solve problems and to convince you about kind of ethical problems, as though art is a way to solve ethical problems. No, artists, they're also to entertain, and entertain in a good way, in a deep way.
If it is in a deep way, like Anish is doing it.
And like in a deep way, and I think I think Anish appeals to people. And, you know, when they go and see, for example, shooting, what is it called, this great shooting piece.
Shooting into a corner. Or what?
Shooting into a corner, which we had at the Royal Academy. Yeah. I mean, we could not keep people away from standing there.
No,
and it was
the same here.
And they're here, and they were entertained. Children were entertained. But as I say, people like myself were also riveted by this kind of automatic Jackson Pollock that was being created. And of course, here in the low rooms of the PinchukArtCentre, you have this wonderful ceiling. And in the ceiling, I mean, you have this fantastic self-generated painting. And fantastically beautiful it is too. And it's changing every day. And I think it's very beautiful. I think it's rather amazing that actually in this kind of relatively, I'm sure the PinchukArtCentre as it is now is not a purpose-built museum building. But the two exhibitions I've seen there, the works of art look very good. They look extremely, they feel incredibly respected. And the works speak because they are what they are. They're very wonderful to look at. And you've made them look good, if I may say so.
Thank you. But at the end, I think good works, if they are not overloaded in an exhibition, are naturally really taking you with you, that you don't look any longer on the space itself. Of course, we know that Anish is always taking care, especially about spaces, as his idea is about, everything is about space.
Like all sculpture, in a way.
Everything is about space, what he's doing. Including what you said about this wonderful mirror. If you stand in this colored mirror and you see that the space expanding to you and entering you and is taking you inside into the work, which I think no one can do it like he is doing it, in combining the idea of a sublime, significant idea of continuing the tradition of contemporary art and modernity, and on the other hand, to involve the viewer, to make him as a main person of the object and the artwork.
How would you compare him, Anisha Kapur, to the American artist of the void? You must.
Richard Serra, for example?
Richard Serra, and also the other artist who, the Californian artist who makes these wonderful. I'm being stupid now.
You mean?
He's doing this big mountain now.
You mean Smithson? Or?
No. We'll come back to it later on.
Yeah.
It'll come back into my head.
And I must say, I once traveled with him to.
But how do you compare him to Serra as an artist? What do you think is the difference between Serra, who's obviously a very significant artist of our time, and Kapur?
Yes, and the reference, say, of Anish to have a certain reference to Richard Serra is obviously, if you look at, for example, at the S-curve, and you think about the works of Richard Serra in Bilbao, this curved pieces.
Have they ever been seen here? The works of Serra? Have they ever been seen in Kiev? Or in
Never. Nothing. But I think he's always looking for, say, not a congruence, but about a reference where he can use something, but she can transform in another new step. Whenever we talked about yesterday about that he's a demanding artist, we talked about that it is necessary to be a demanding artist to make sure that he doesn't stand still. And the same, we know that you need a certain reference to other artists who are living and who have really a significant work to reflect about this, but to transform it, on the other hand, immediately to a new step. And I think this is what he is doing.
Yeah, but
as everything about the material, how Serra is using, is
about the material itself.
Exactly, and about the rawness and about pure form.
He's purely a kind of formalist, ultimately.
Not really. If you talk with Richard Serra, then of course he always expresses that he wants to have a certain psychological input for the viewer. You know about these works where you have to go like this, and you feel, this
it's going to fall on top of you.
Fall on top of you.
Danger.
A danger. And there is a certain similarity with Anish, as
But the danger in Anish is somehow
much more
gentle, sublime and gentle.
Sublime. Yeah, it's much more refined.
And also illusionistic too.
It is, exactly.
The tricks he plays, he's not afraid of tricks, and he likes them.
Okay.
I think he rather likes them.
Okay.
When you look at a work and you're not quite sure whether it is on the surface or whether it is going in, whether you can put your hand inside.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Richard would never do that.
No, of course not.
Richard is about the material.
He is playing like an American tradition. It should be big, it should be long, it should be strong, it should be pure material, and it should be heavy. That's what he's talking about. But he used it as in a very, sure, Richard also, in a very psychological way of acting with the viewer as in this question of danger. Mm-hmm. Not only danger about that it falls on you, but danger about that an artwork is a danger.
It is dangerous.
It is dangerous.
And actually one is
dangerous. Yeah. A good artwork is always dangerous.
But there's never a sense of illusion.
That's true. Of course, he is a true American artist. In the idea, you see what you see.
And with Anish?
Don't trust what you see. See a little more, come back, and then you discover more and more depths. Why
don't we talk a little bit about his Indianness too?
I don't know enough about the Indian. I've never been, I have been once, but I've never learned enough about.
I've never been to India, but do you think there is a kind of, as it were, a tantric aspect to his work? A kind of mandala aspect to his work?
I think so, yes, of course.
He loves going to India still, yeah. And he still finds it a source of huge inspiration. The whole idea of the kind of primary colors.
Exactly.
The idea of the
pureness of the work.
Purity.
Yes, the purity, yeah.
Is a very important aspect of Anish as well.
Yes.
So there's something again in Anish which is, one has to say, he was like a kind of, I hate to say, a kind of citizen of the world in a way. He's a man of East and he's a man of West.
And again, Jewish, which is very interesting.
This East and West thing, though, is very interesting. So he's doing what Beuys always dreamt of. Of course, Beuys is always talking about the Eurasian figure, Eurasia.
Yeah, and you mentioned the minimalism. He's using this American tradition and he's combining it in a very new way.
I think so. I think he's a very exceptional, very beautiful artist. Now let's talk about a little bit also about the what I call the dirty aspect and the smooth aspect. Do you think that they reflect on each other? Do you think they're part of the same? Are they the opposite sides of the same coin, or are they very different? Do you feel there's a schizophrenia in the work of Anish or not?
No, I think he needs this say the contradiction and to balance it out, not to balance it out, but in like a dialogue between both sides. Like our human beings are. Not only the positive side, but the negative side also. So das Böse,
the evil,
the darkness, to go to limbo, to go down, to really, if you look at
to descend.
Work, yes, exactly, the descent. So many works are talking about to go into the earth, to go down. Even including, of course, the idea to go back to the say, where you come out, being born and going back.
And to be in the womb. And to imagine being in the womb is another aspect of Anish, I think, too, don't you think?
Yeah.
This womb-like aspect?
It is. Including that the idea of always to combine inside and outside as a significant aspect of his work. You never see the work only from one side. Only about that you look inside. You always have the form which expresses that you have an outside also. And it is significant, big, say, public works. He is using that in a very, including this work we have commissioned in the PinchukArtCentre. You look from outside on this huge, big, rusty and really massive sculpture, And then you go
to the other
side, and you see the sublime black
endlessness.
First the black square, in a way, black rectangle.
A bit like Malevich.
Yes, and then you go closer, and then you discover, oh, you can look inside, and the darkness gets more shiny, and then you see, well, the sculpture. It has two sides, anyhow.
And of course, in the massive piece, which we didn't have photographs of here, of the big installation he did last year in Paris, the Leviathan,
was amazing.
Which was amazing. And the first piece, there were two pieces, do you remember? And the first piece, when you went to it, was literally, you felt, as when you went inside, as though you were entering the womb. And it was a very extraordinary experience, which you could experience. In a way, he's allowing the visitor to have his own personal experience. And that's what he's continually doing. I think that's one of the beauties. He's not imposing. He's leaving the experience open. It's constantly changing. When you're moving around it, the work is constantly changing. Exactly. It is never static.
The perspective is always changing.
The perspective is always changing, depending on you, depending on the other people around, depending on the space in which the object is.
So he activates
and
us.
if the work is in the open air, on the clouds, on the weather, it is a work in constant movement. And again, movement is a very important part of Kapura's work. I mean, the beauty about Anísh, I think, is the way, in fact, he manages to cover so many extraordinary possibilities of making art almost by default, in a way, almost without intending to. I think he's often very surprised at the results of what he's doing. And there's, of course, another aspect to Anísh, too. There's something of the scientist in him, too. He's an architect, a kind of spiritual scientist, as though he's constantly, like, after discovering new optical effects, the way color works, the way color refracts, matte color, shiny color. I mean, all these things are very important to him, and he's constantly being surprised by his own endless inventiveness in his studio and outside, which he obviously has to do in collaboration with other people.
I mean, what you just mentioned about that, I think he almost himself is surprised about what happens. Is he's all the time exploring and expanding his work, and demanding about this to explore it. And when I traveled once with him, he said, "Well, Eckhardt, to tell you the truth, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not sure about what I'm doing."
No, there's a very insecure aspect to him,
exactly,
too. But that insecurity means openness.
Exactly. He is open to really to go for risk. And I think we know that the most important thing is if artists are going for risk, if they repeat themselves constantly, then they are lost, and then they do it as like signature works, which you really say, well, we know this already. There is no new aspect in this work. But I think what is great and what I really love is him, I know him now, I mean, since 1990, and working with him, that he never stands still. He never stands still in going for a certain risk with his work and trying to expand his work.
I mean, the other interesting is to compare him with his British contemporaries, like Richard Long, for example, who is very
Richard Deacon.
Or Richard Deacon,
the typical British sculpture tradition.
Of course, the British sculpture tradition, which he stands, or even Gilbert and George. I mean, he is part of that world in a funny kind of way. And all these artists who did, in fact, exhibit more one time or other at the Liston Gallery, and it's rather strange how particular galleries all over the world have had a very signal character. There are a handful of galleries throughout the world. One thinks of Leo Castelli or Ileana Sonnabend in America, or Michael Werner in Germany. And one can say that Nicholas Logsdale, this particular gallerist, has brought out and brought forward and encouraged a number of very significant artists.
Absolutely.
And one of them is certainly Anísh. And the question is, and they all share a kind of, at one level, a common aesthetic. I would say. Would you agree? There is a sort of, what do you think, Carmen? You're German, so how do you, if you were comparing Richard Long to Anisha Kapura, how would you compare them?
No,
I'd be quite interested to hear what you say.
Yeah, but what I think is in general about these generation is, I mean, I think Richard Long is something different. If I look at Richard Deacon and Anisha Kapura and Craig.
Tony Craig.
Tony Craig
is another, of course.
Yes, exactly. Then I think what they have in common, you can't compare them, I mean, that they really have significant, unique ideas about, but what is in common is how free they are in using different materials.
Yeah.
It was never before like this. Either you had to decide to work with steel or whatever,
or bricks,
or bricks or whatever, but not how they did it, to explore the question about materialization. A sculpture is always about material. You need material to make a sculpture. And this is a significant idea about how to transform this, what they did before. The generation before just transformed a form into a sculpture.
Or use bronze, or whatever.
That's the reason why they always use bronze. As it is not, I mean, they started with clay, and then they, or with whatever, with
wax?
Wax? No, yeah, or with wie sagt man,
auf Deutsch.
Ja, ich finde es noch nicht mal in Deutsch.
Tell me. Anyway, stay with clay.
Anyway. But the new thing of this generation is that they tried to explore the question about materialization in relation to the sculpture as an idea, not only about form. The form is free. How they are using the form is completely free. It doesn't follow.
Gormley too is another one.
Exactly. It doesn't follow any longer a certain, say, tradition. There is, of course, a tradition in using, say, a human being, the idea of Anthony Gormley, the figure, the sculpture, the figure itself as a sculpture.
But constantly transformed, the endless possible transformations there.
Exploring what it means to insert there a space, or to suck out space.
They're amazing rivals, of course, now.
Of course, including the decision about the
Olympic
Tower.
Yeah, unbelievable rivals. Yeah. They deeply hate each other now, but that's never mind.
No, never mind. Yeah. So,
but I'm sure they respect each other deep down.
Of course,
they have.
Of course, they always ask about that.
Really?
Yeah.
So, what would you like to see a great Anisha Kapura's public sculpture in Kiev, for example?
I would love. I think it would be great, especially for the society here. As what you said, I mean, the people here are very communicative. They are very social. They are very.
So I can tell
open.
By being here.
And I think this would mean something for this
participatory aspect.
Exactly, the participation. I mean, that you reflect yourself. I mean, to be proud about yourself and to see yourself, but including that it is a demonstration of really artistic power.
Which you see, for example, so wonderfully in the Chicago sculpture.
Wow.
And to have a wonderful bridge across the Dnieper, is it?
The Dnieper.
The Dnieper would be the most fantastic thing, and there is a piece which would work perfectly. So I think we have to ask, I think we should all sign a letter to Mr. Pinchuk and say, please organize this. By the way, the artist whose name I couldn't remember suddenly come back into my computer, namely my brain, which is a bit slow, James Turrell.
Oh, yes,
and, you know, I mean, he's a kind of artist, again. Ultimately, I think that Anisha is a more complex figure in what it is, infinitely more complex.
I think sometimes Turrell is a little bit kitschy, to say it frankly and free, and I mean how he's working, and he transforms the sublime to a kitschy form. But again, in Anisha Kapura, I always discover that he is aware that the things are not only sublime, that they always have a certain raw, basic and a raw context.
And a sexual context.
Of course. Everything is about sexuality. in his work.
Which it is not.
More or less.
And in Turrell, it is about nothingness.
Nothing.
It's about the sublime nothing.
It is neutral. It's a neutral.
It's a neutral thing.
Neutral thing.
And actually, if you meet him, he's quite neutral. That's another whole subject.
You should not talk
We don't think we want to go there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting meeting artists, of course. Meeting artists is a very special privilege that both you and I share. And of course, knowing artists gives you the most fantastic insight into who they are, into both their strengths and into their, as I said, we talked earlier about their insecurities and the way they use their insecurities. It's the insecurities, in a curious way, that drive them.
Which makes
would you agree with me?
really good artists. I mean, as you mentioned, Picasso.
Yeah.
The reason why he was endless working, that he always searched for something which he couldn't find till now. That was, to be insecure about this.
And I find that with my friend, Georg Baselitz too. The insecurity is absolutely fantastic, and yet he still continues, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, to produce astonishing masterpieces.
Yeah, I think so.
And David Hockney the same. David Hockney, whose wonderful exhibition was at the Royal Academy, which I somehow initiated about 5 years ago, which actually came to fruition this year, was this incredible celebration of colour and of invention, unbelievably inventive, even at the age of, in his mid-70s. And I think the wonderful thing about Anisha is the way he goes on being endlessly inventive because of his insecurity, because of his deep insecurity as a human being, and because of his deep insecurity professionally. At the same time, demanding the earth, wanting somehow to make the earth in his image, in a funny kind of way. Artists want to do that, would you not agree? And Anisha is definitely that kind of artist. He wants the world to look like him. He wants to attach himself to build it, I mean, he's just done the most fantastic collaboration, I think, with Herzog and de Meuron, which I think you can see photographs of in the exhibition in the PinchukArtCentre, isn't that right? If I'm not mistaken, where he's somehow taken this tower and this kind of underground thing, or this kind of street level thing where he's attached a sculpture to a building.
Yes.
And
the weight
is bringing it down in the most fantastic way.
Yeah.
So he's always, as I say, he's more than an architect. He's more than a sculptor.
He's more than a painter.
And he's more than a painter. I mean, one can only say that he's Anisha Kapur. He's a kind of unique figure, and I've come to him very late, but come to him with immense enthusiasm, and doing the exhibition with him and talking about it with him, and beginning to work. And the exhibition is next April, can I tell you, in Berlin. And he's so busy and so in demand that somehow we're not even quite sure what we're going to do. But nonetheless, we know it's going to happen. It will happen. I have no doubt that it's going to happen. And that somehow he's now going to concentrate, and in fact I now know that he is concentrating on the big exhibition in Berlin. It's not that far away from Kiev. It's only an hour and a half on the plane.
We will come.
I think you better come, and I hope you could. But maybe the best thing you could do is to ask Mr. Pinchuk to hire a plane and take everybody in this audience who's been so good as to come to this exhibition and take them to Berlin just for the day, just to see another show. It would be a fantastic thing to do. Because it's all about, art is about seeing things and seeing things everywhere. And what you've done here is, I think, a very, very adequate, more than adequate presentation of one of our great British artists, and one of our great artists, a great artist, but we're very happy that it should be here.
I'm very glad that you mentioned this. As the
questions, I think we want to have questions.
Just to finish this. I think the most beautiful thing of art is that you see it with your body and with your eyes and with all your mental power. I mean, you can see it. Everything can be artificial, can be virtual. But you can't,
and even intellectual.
Exactly, but you can't have an artwork only virtually. You have to stand body by body, present of the work.
Yeah.
Then it tells you something, and I think that's the reason why you have to go anyhow to Berlin.
Of course. Now, some questions. I think it's time for questions. If anybody wants to ask some questions, we'd be very, very happy to at least engage in a little bit of dialogue. We would really like that too. Is there anybody who would like to say something? Or even make a statement and say that they think, you know, what they feel about Anísh as an artist? I mean, tell me, you're an art historian over there. You told me you're an art historian. We spoke earlier. What did you think of the exhibition? Do you want to say anything about it? What? Sorry to put you on the spot like this.
I'm sure that I will go twice after listening all your lecture, and I want to see it one more, and maybe to change my mind.
But what was your mind initially? How did you react the first time? Did you enjoy it, or?
I was surprised, and I want to explain it to myself more than I could read. So I think that I need some time to think about his art. So it's really hard to understand it, like by visual and so on. There are some artists that need explanation, and he is one of them.
You think he needs explanation?
Yes, I think so.
You really think he doesn't explain himself? I mean, if you're standing in front, I mean, you don't think it explains itself. I personally feel, but of course I may be wrong, you know, I feel that his art does, he's one of the few artists of this world at a high level who really, I think, explains himself completely. Even more than Jeff Koons in a way. Would you agree with that, Eckhard?
Not completely. I understand it's a certain way of first distance, not to come completely. I mean, I think always, I mean, if you see a work of Aníša Kапura, different works, it's surprising then to see the reality of the beautiness of these works. This is clear. But on the other hand, I mean, all this, what is in the deeper context of this, I think there is a certain necessity to go to these roots and to not to explain it, but to see the references, where what he's reflecting about. So
yeah, in a sense, I contradict myself because, as I said, it took me. He was one of the artists. It took me a long time to discover. So maybe I'm closer to you than I thought. So I contradict myself. Would you like to say something? You looked as though the guy in red. You looked as though you wanted to say something. No.
Okay.
Who would like to say something about the exhibition? Say something about it. And we would love to know what you guys from this beautiful city, on such a sunny day, on such a warm evening, would think about this exhibition. And indeed, come on, thank you.
I want to say about the exhibition. I've been to Aníša Kapura exhibition many times here, and each time that I was coming again, I liked it more and more. And I keep coming because every time you feel it deeper. And this is why I want to thank you especially for the remark about how art should be probably understood for all the people, which critics may disagree with, because that makes it emotional, and Aníša Kapura does it, so nice. I'm really losing the idea.
I think I agree with you completely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the other thing about Aníš, which is so beautiful, is the whole kinetic aspect of his work, not just in the moving things. Everything is on the move in a way.
You as a viewer.
As a viewer,
you always have to be. You must move. Yes, of course.
In order to appreciate the pieces.
Yes.
Because this is how exactly the art can change the mind of masses. Only if the masses understand it and feel it too.
So a great public sculpture by Aníš in Kiev is something I think we should start campaigning for, don't you?
Yes.
I'll write a letter to Mr. Pinchuk when I get back to London.
With the support of British Council.
With the support. Does anybody else want to say anything before we bring this? I hope. I don't know whether it's been helpful to talk like this. What do you think, Have we, I don't know whether we've illuminated this extraordinary character in some way. What do you think?
Well, I mean, perhaps we expressed how deeply we are enthusiastic about his work. So everyone should forgive us about this, that we took this position.
Yeah, we're not fighting about him.
No.
Does Aníš have enemies, would you say, in the world of art? In the way that Jeff Koons or Damien Hirst clearly has,
yes.
They have enemies.
Yes, they have. I don't think so. I think it's not polarizing like Jeff's work is doing. No, I don't think so.
That's good. No. So
hello.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Yes, hello, Norman. In the video that you showed there, Aníš said that as an artist, he doesn't have anything to say. And I wondered whether the two of you could sort of unpack that comment a bit and explain what he might mean by that.
I think he means, first of all, he doesn't have, in that sense, a political agenda in a world where art is supposed to have a political agenda. Or a lot of people think art should have a political agenda. As I said earlier on, you go to all these biennales and documentas, and they seem to be overloaded with ideologies, basically. Different ideologies about, the wrongs of the world. And of course there are many wrongs in the world. So I don't think Aníš is trying to kind of solve the problems of the world. He's just trying to make what he feels are extraordinary objects. And so I don't think he wants people to talk about them too much. That's perhaps why even ourselves have not, he's quite a difficult artist to talk about. Even though there are, I think, always underlying nuances to his work. As I said, for example, in The Train, there is clearly an underlying special nuance in pieces like that. But I don't think he wants to say anything beyond what he's saying. And of course, art is a language. And if you can say it with words, you say it with words. And if you want to say things with things, if you want to paint, you paint what you can't say with words. You paint what you can't even think, or at least you can't express with words. That's a kind of very special quality of art and music. And so in that sense, his art is striving to be almost more like music than it is to be like words. Why is music so extraordinary? Why is a symphony or a string quartet, or indeed any music that you respond to, wonderful? And you're not listening to words. Maybe you're listening to a song, but usually even in great songs by, I don't know whether it's the Beatles or Schubert, you can barely understand the words. You're responding to the rhythm. So I think in art, always, you're responding to these mysterious things, whether it's color, whether it's form, whether it's line. And in the case of Aníš, all three, you're responding to form, you're responding to color, you're responding to line, kind of instinctively, and it's making you feel satisfied and good. As I say, there's no moral, I always say this about art. I said this to some students this afternoon who I was talking to. There's no moral imperative to like these things, but to have these things and these shapes and these forms and these colors and these movements in your life is very life-enhancing and very enriching in a very, dare I say it, mysterious way. That's my general attitude to art in general, and to Aníš as much as, and with it to Aníša Kapura, not specifically, but as much as anybody.
Yeah, but in general, I think what Aníš tries to avoid is, first of all, as we talked about, he is completely unsure about what he's doing. Of course, he knows that he wants to find a really, great balance between these aspects we discussed. And on the other hand, he knows if he gives an idea about what the work should mean, the viewer is blocked, and it is not any longer open. as I think the most important quality of a work is if the work is always constantly open to reflect again and again, and even to find new aspects. If a work is finished like this, that you finish your ideas and your thinking about, then the work is dead, and I think it is bad. You can forget it.
It's about searching.
It's constantly about searching. I mean, and he is searching.
In the dark.
You as a viewer have to search, and if the work doesn't help you, I mean, doesn't offer you to search, then the work is lost.
And meaningless.
Yes.
And even meaningless.
Yeah.
So this sense of process, of searching, of sometimes not finding, but forms which are pregnant in a funny kind of way, which are constantly evolving, even in themselves. So, I mean, if you look at that beautiful alabaster piece, you know, when you stand near it, when you stand close to it, when you get to the side of it, it's constantly changing, and if you, in different light, it changes. You know, like a great stained glass window is always changing. The world is always changing. The clouds are always changing. And so somehow an artist helps us to look at the world, and he helps us, like different artists, look at the world in a different way. But he, you know, tonight I look at the balls on that balustrade. Not special balls, really. And suddenly they begin almost to look, the world begins to look. You suddenly see Anisha Kapur in the world. So those three balls, and there must be three over there too. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah, I understand. They look like, and you know, if he was here, he would suddenly see them. And that ball, which looks as though it's almost rolling down, but is static. You know, it's not, but it's actually quite a banal thing. But for this moment, this evening, as we think about Anish, it almost feels like him, and the world feels like him. You know, I'm not an art critic, fortunately. I'm a person who's devoted his life to trying to find works of art to love. So I'm not in that sense a critical person. I hate to be critical, like art historians and art critics in particular. If I don't like things, and there are many things I don't like, most things I don't like. I mean, when I went round the sculpture exhibition this afternoon in the Arsenal, it was very difficult to find things I really liked, you know, because there's an awful lot of rubbish that goes under the name of art in the world. But there are a handful, and I'm a great believer, I'm afraid, in a very unfashionable thing called the genius. The genius who doesn't even know that he's a genius. Yes. Anish does not know that he's, in that sense, a genius. But somehow he's managed in his way to transform the way we are all able, if we wish to, only if we wish to look at the world. And that's one of his great things. As I say, absolutely. I am not a critic. I'm not in that sense a historian. I've devoted my life to trying to present art and make it look good and to elevate the position of the artists that I happen to believe in at the time that I'm working with them. And as I say, art has many, many different mansions too. There are many artists in this world. You know, artists, of course, are very single-minded and can have very narrow views of the world. But I think if you are a lover of art, as I am, and devote your life to loving art, I mean, you have to be open to many, many possibilities, and I think Anish has put very extraordinary possibilities into the world.
Absolutely.
That's my view, anyway.
Thank you, Norman.
Okay, does that keep us going for the evening or not? Or do you want some more? Have I bored you enough? Any more? We're more than happy, because we didn't start till a quarter of an hour later than the advertised time, so...
Hello. You were talking about the public work, which is already done, and we can commission. I mean, the city of Kyiv can commission it. And you also were talking about the next exhibition in Berlin. So my question is about the link of the work with the local context and with the place, actually. If there is any link between works and the place where they are exhibited, or it's just like the mirror which reflects the country or wherever the people who watch those works?
I mean, there's certain works of art you can move around, you know. I mean, you know, if you take a mirror piece, even a largish mirror piece, they can be moved relatively easily. And then there are other works of art which are very much based on the specific site. There are many unrealized projects, of course, that you can see in this exhibition. It's rather beautiful that you have them here, and at a certain level you can pick and choose. Yesterday I had the audacity to try and pick and choose one for Kiev, but I mean there are others you could pick and choose that could be adapted. On the other hand, if you bring Anish to a site and say this is a site where I would like a sculpture, I'm sure he would be more than happy and give his full attention to possibly realizing a special sculpture. I mean, in Naples, for example, he's done the most fantastic entrance to a subway station. But going down the subway station somehow resembles going actually into the womb, doesn't it? I mean, it's the most incredible idea. And it's being built at the moment. So I don't know whether it's been completed, has it? Do you know, Eckhard?
Not yet.
Will it be complete?
They have financial problems at the moment in
Naples. There are a lot of financial problems in Naples and southern Italy at the moment. But anyway, the idea is there.
It's fantastic.
And it's a fantastic idea. And it's a very transforming idea. And it goes one further to the wonderful railway stations that are decorated, particularly that were done in the Soviet Union. I mean, they were fantastic murals that were done in Moscow, and I dare say here in various railway stations and things like that. I mean, art is there to give people, to enhance people's lives and to enhance places too, and to transform places. So obviously there's movable art, like paintings and sculptures and small sculptures and even quite large sculptures. They can be moved quite easily. Then there are these sculptures which Anisha is very keen on doing and has found ways of doing, which are very specific to a particular moment, a particular site, a particular place, a particular geography, even particular weather.
Yep.
So he's, very open in that way. And his imagination has come a long way since what's it again? I keep forgetting the title.
1,000 years.
1,000 years. But maybe some of these works may last for 1,000 years. I hope they will.
Yes.
Okay. And give pleasure for 1,000 years, too. Anybody else like a question? Thank you. Sir. The gentleman with the white shirt. The friend with the white shirt.
Good evening, and I want to thank you for your open study program, and it was interesting for me to listen about modern art and to hear your view on Anisha Kапur and to find something new in this exhibition.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to say these kind words. I mean, it's an honor for me to be here and in your very beautiful green city. It's a very beautiful green. I was taken around by a very nice friend this morning in a car, and I felt I don't know Kiev properly. I've only been here once before, very briefly. But you have a very beautiful, very intact city. I mean, considering the traumas of the 20th century, I think Kiev seems, given its ghastly history, 50, 60, 70 years ago, amazingly intact and very beautiful. And it's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
My honor and my pleasure. Thank you.